2 hours after my father publicly trashed the new cultural center as soulless modernist garbage, I stood frozen at the gala dinner as the host announced. And now, let's welcome the visionary architect behind Miami's most controversial new landmark, Jade Williams. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the marble floor as 300 of the city's elite, including my stunned father, turned to stare at me. 5 years of designing under a pseudonym, undone in an instant. My father, the great Harold Williams, titan of neoclassical architecture, had spent the cocktail hour loudly dissecting everything wrong with the building to anyone who would listen. No respect for proportion, he'd proclaimed, gesturing with his whiskey. No understanding of human scale. Whoever designed this monstrosity clearly never studied the classics. Now his face had gone completely white, jaw slack with disbelief as I slowly made my way to the stage. The Williams name had opened every door in my life, while simultaneously making it impossible to walk through any of them on my own merit. When I'd chosen architecture, everyone assumed I'd join my father's firm, creating the grand, columned buildings that had made him famous. Instead, I'd created a new identity, J.K. Stone, experimental architect, gender and background deliberately obscured. For 5 years, I'd lived a double life, corporate designer at a mid-level firm by day, boundary-pushing independent architect by night. And now the mask was off. I took the podium, my heart hammering so hard I feared the microphone might pick it up. Thank you for the kind introduction, I managed, scanning the room until I found my father's eyes. The Cultural Center represents a new direction for Miami architecture, one that embraces our future while honoring our past. As I delivered my remarks about sustainable materials and community integration, I watched my father's expression shift from shock to something more complex, disappointment, confusion, and perhaps a flicker of something else I couldn't identify. My mother sat beside him, hands clasped tightly, her usual perfect composure fractured by genuine surprise. Neither of them had suspected. Not once. After the speech, I slipped into a service corridor, desperate for a moment alone. My phone vibrated with notifications, colleagues connecting J.K. Stone with Jade Williams for the first time, surprised messages from friends, a text from my mother, "We need to talk." Now, before I could respond, the corridor door opened. My father stood there, still imposing at 65, his silver hair and tailored tuxedo projecting the gravitas that had intimidated clients and critics alike for decades. 5 years, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. You've been designing as this stone person for 5 years while sitting at our dinner table and never once mentioning it. I straightened my spine. Would you have listened if I had? That's not fair, Jade. Isn't it? You just spent an hour calling my design philosophy an affront to architecture itself. He stepped closer. I didn't know it was yours. That's exactly the point. My voice remained steady despite the emotions churning inside. The only way to get an honest reaction from you, from anyone in this field, was to remove the Williams name from the equation. A catering staff member appeared at the far end of the corridor, saw us, and quickly retreated. My father sighed. Come back to the gala. We shouldn't do this here. I'm not doing this anywhere tonight, I replied, feeling a strange new power in standing my ground. I have a building to celebrate. We can talk tomorrow. I moved past him, shoulder nearly brushing his, when he said, I would have known it was you if you'd ever shown me any of it. I paused, hand on the door. You never asked to see my work, Dad. Not once since I left Yale. The door closed behind me with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam. I returned to the gala, where Miami's elite now viewed me through a transformed lens. No longer just Harold Williams' daughter, but the controversial J.K. Stone. People who'd ignored me at previous events now approached with business cards and compliments. Several who had been nodding along with my father's earlier criticism now praised the Cultural Center's boldness and vision. Thomas, my business partner and the only person who knew my secret, materialized at my elbow with a fresh glass of champagne. "Well, that was quite the revelation scene," he murmured. "How are you holding up?" "Surprisingly okay," I said, accepting the drink. Though I'm pretty sure my father is having an existential crisis by the bar. Thomas followed my gaze to where my father stood in intense conversation with my mother, his gestures more animated than his usual controlled demeanor. "You know, for what it's worth," Thomas said, "he actually looked proud when you were speaking." I nearly choked on my champagne. Proud? He spent the cocktail hour comparing my building to a soulless concrete bunker. "That was before he knew it was yours," Thomas said. "You should have seen his face when they announced your name." After the initial shock, there was definitely pride there. I wasn't sure I believed him, but had no time to debate as the mayor approached, eager to discuss future projects. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, subtle job offers, and the occasional whispered question about why I'd used a pseudonym, always accompanied by a glance toward my father. By midnight, as the gala wound down, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I'd spent years hiding my work, and despite the uncomfortable confrontation, there was freedom in finally being recognized for it. I was preparing to leave when Sofia Martinez, editor of Architecture Today and one of my father's oldest friends, intercepted me. "Jade, darling, what a delicious surprise," she said, air-kissing my cheeks. "I always knew you had talent, but this level of deception?" She laughed. "Brilliant marketing strategy." "It wasn't marketing, Sophia. I just wanted my work judged on its own merits." Of course. She waved her hand dismissively. "But surely you must have enjoyed your father's face when they called your name? After all his criticism." "I didn't do this to humiliate him." "No." She arched a perfectly penciled eyebrow. "Well, intention aside, it was quite the coup. Your building is the talk of the industry, and now this dramatic reveal." She tapped her crimson nails against her clutch. "I'd love to feature you in our next issue." Out of Father's Shadow, The Secret Rise of J.K. Stone. What do you think? I thought about the years I'd spent building my career in secret, the nights and weekends sacrificed to create something that was purely mine. This moment shouldn't be reduced to family drama. I appreciate the offer, but I'd prefer to focus on the architecture itself, not family dynamics. Her smile tightened. "The architecture alone isn't the story anymore, darling. Your father has been the face of Miami design for 30 years. You challenging his entire aesthetic while hiding behind a pseudonym? That's the story everyone wants." "Then I'll have to disappoint everyone," I said firmly. "Good night, Sophia." As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with my father, who had approached silently behind me. "Dad," I said, startled. "I was just leaving." "I'll walk you out," he replied, nodding curtly to Sophia, who watched us with undisguised interest. We moved through the emptying ballroom in uncomfortable silence, nodding goodbye to lingering guests. Outside, the Miami night was warm and heavy with humidity, the cultural center visible in the distance, its innovative lighting system creating a gentle glow against the sky. "Your mother took a taxi home," my father said. "She's processing. And you?" He looked toward my building, its silhouette so different from anything he'd ever designed. "I'm trying to see it through new eyes." I followed his gaze. "And the cantilever on the eastern wing is." He paused, choosing his words carefully, more graceful than I initially gave it credit for. Coming from him, this was practically effusive praise. I felt a complicated warmth spread through my chest. "The interior sightlines were inspired by your Westlake Museum project," I admitted. "The way you directed visitors through the space without making them feel controlled." He turned to me, surprise evident. "You studied my buildings?" "Of course I did. I just needed to find my own language." A sleek black car pulled to the curb, my rideshare. As the driver confirmed my name, my father said we should talk. "Properly. Maybe you could show me your current projects." The request was so unexpected I almost didn't process it. For years, I'd imagined showing him my work, explaining my vision, seeking not approval exactly, but understanding. And now he was asking. "I'm presenting initial concepts for the Riverside development next week," I said carefully. "You could come to that." He nodded, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his manner. "I'd like that." As I slid into the car, he added, "The cultural center really is remarkable, Jade. Not what I would have done, but remarkable nonetheless." The car pulled away, and I watched my father's figure recede in the rear window. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Architectural Digest wants an interview. The secret's out." And they love it. I leaned back against the seat, a smile spreading across my face. After years of hiding in plain sight, I was finally visible not as Harold Williams' daughter, but as the architect of my own vision. The following morning, I woke to hundreds of notifications. Overnight, the story had exploded, not just in architectural circles, but in mainstream media. Architect's daughter secretly designs building father publicly criticized, made for irresistible headlines. My phone rang constantly, most calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, focusing instead on an email from my father sent at 4:37 a.m. "Jade, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the cultural center. Drove there at dawn to see it in morning light. I was wrong about the facade. The way it catches the sunrise, it's actually quite extraordinary. There's a proposal I'd like to discuss. Call when you can." Dad, I read it 3 times, trying to decipher the subtext. This wasn't like him. The admission of error, the compliment, the open-ended invitation. Before I could respond, my buzzer rang. Through the intercom, Thomas's voice. "Let me in. I've got coffee and approximately 50 press inquiries." I buzzed him up to my downtown apartment, quickly throwing on presentable clothes. Thomas had been my rock throughout this journey, the brilliant structural engineer who'd partnered with J.K. Stone when no established firm would take a chance on my experimental designs. He'd kept my secret, challenged my ideas, and celebrated every milestone. "You've gone viral," he announced, handing me a latte and dropping a stack of newspapers on my kitchen counter. Architectural Record, Design Quarterly, even the Miami Herald front page. I scanned the headlines while sipping my coffee, most focused on the father-daughter drama rather than the architecture itself. "It's exactly what I didn't want," I sighed. "Maybe," Thomas conceded, "but it's bringing unprecedented attention to your work. The Cultural Center's visitor numbers have tripled overnight. The mayor's office called. They want to fast-track approval for the Riverside project." I set down my coffee. That project's been stuck in committee for months. Until the city discovered they had a celebrity architect on their hands. Thomas spread several mock-ups on the counter. Speaking of Riverside, I worked up some adjustments to the community space based on last week's feedback. I welcomed the shift to actual work, and we spent the next hour deep in technical discussions about load-bearing walls and natural light paths. This was what I loved, the problem-solving, the balance of aesthetics and function, not the family drama that now overshadowed it all. My intercom buzzed again. The doorman's voice. "Ms. Williams, your father is here." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "Want me to make myself scarce?" "No," I said quickly. "Stay." My father entered looking uncharacteristically casual in chinos and a polo shirt rather than his usual tailored suit. He carried a worn leather portfolio I recognized from my childhood, the one that contained his most important sketches. "Thomas," he acknowledged with a nod, then turned to me. "I should have called first." "It's fine," I said. "We were just working on the Riverside project." "Ah." He glanced at the plans spread across my counter. "That's actually related to why I'm here." He hesitated, then set the portfolio on the counter. "I have a proposition." I waited, tension creeping up my spine. "The Gateway project," he said. "You're familiar with it?" I nodded. The Gateway was set to be Miami's most significant development in decades, a massive mixed-use waterfront property that would define the city's skyline for generations. Every major firm was competing for it, including my father's. The submission deadline is next month, he continued. I've been working on concepts, but after seeing your cultural center. He unzipped the portfolio and withdrew several hand-drawn sketches. I wondered what might happen if we combined our approaches. Thomas made a small sound of surprise beside me. I stared at my father, certain I'd misunderstood. You want to collaborate? On Gateway? Williams and Stone, he said, holding my gaze. A legacy firm and a bold new vision. Traditional foundations supporting innovative expressions. I looked down at his sketches, classic Harold Williams designs with their perfect proportions and timeless elegance. But in the margins were new elements, experimental forms that he'd never employed before, clearly influenced by my work at the Cultural Center. You're serious, I said, still processing. Completely. He spread the sketches across the counter. Your cantilevers, my columns. Your sustainable materials, my sense of history. We could create something revolutionary. Thomas whistled softly. That would be quite the statement. I studied my father's face, searching for hidden motives. Yesterday, you called my design philosophy an affront to architecture. I was wrong, he said simply. Too entrenched in my own perspective to see the value in yours. The Cultural Center opened my eyes, not just to your talent, but to possibilities I'd dismissed. His admission hung in the air between us. My entire career had been built on separating myself from his influence, on proving I could succeed without the Williams name. Yet here he was, offering not just recognition but partnership, acknowledging me as an equal. I need to think about it, I said finally. He nodded, unsurprised. Of course, but don't take too long. The architectural world is watching both of us now. After he left, Thomas leaned against the counter. Well, that was unexpected. Completely. I stared at the sketches my father had left behind. I'm not sure how to feel about this. It's a complicated offer, Thomas agreed. On one hand, it's the recognition you've always deserved from him. On the other, it feels like being absorbed back into his orbit after I fought so hard to escape it. Exactly. But consider this, working together doesn't mean becoming him or even becoming like him. It means changing him too. I traced my finger along one of my father's sketches, noting how he'd already begun incorporating elements of my style into his traditionally rigid approach. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe collaboration didn't have to mean capitulation. I need to see the site again, I decided. Clear my head. The Gateway site was a prime stretch of waterfront property, currently home to aging warehouses slated for demolition. I walked its perimeter as afternoon faded into evening, imagining what could rise from this blank canvas. My father saw grand colonnades and timeless elegance. I envisioned flowing forms and sustainable innovations. Could those visions truly coexist? My phone rang my mother. I'd been avoiding her calls all day. Hi, Mom. Jade. Her voice was carefully measured. Your father told me about his proposal. And I'm calling to make sure you know you don't have to accept it. Your success is your own. Don't let him co-opt it. I was surprised by her directness. My mother, Elena Williams, had always been diplomatic to a fault, especially regarding my father's career. You don't think I should work with him? She sighed. I think you should recognize this pattern. Your father sees something successful, something that challenges him, and he moves to control it. He's done it his entire career. This feels different, I said, though doubt crept in. He's actually acknowledging my ideas have value. Of course they have value, they're making headlines. Harold has always had a talent for recognizing which way the wind is blowing. Her tone softened. I'm proud of you, Jade. Incredibly proud. I just don't want to see you disappear into his shadow again. After we hung up, I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching the sunset paint Miami's skyline in vivid oranges and pinks. My mother's warning resonated, but so did the memory of my father's face when he proposed our collaboration. There had been genuine excitement there, something I'd rarely seen in him. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia Martinez. Deadline extended for our feature. Reconsider? This could establish you completely independent from your father. Before I could respond, another text arrived from an architectural forum I frequented as J.K. Stone. It contained a link to a newly published interview with my father. Curious, I clicked it. Interviewer, many have noted the irony of your criticism of the cultural center before learning your daughter was its architect. How do you respond to that? Harold Williams, with humility. I've spent decades believing architecture should follow certain principles. Jade's work, which she created without any input or influence from me, challenged those principles and, frankly, proved some of them wrong. That takes extraordinary courage and vision. Interviewer, would you say her work has influenced your thinking? Harold Williams, profoundly. It's forced me to reconsider assumptions I've held my entire career. In fact, I've proposed a collaboration that would combine our strengths. Interviewer, some might see that as an attempt to control her success or bring it under the Williams brand. Harold Williams, I understand why people might think that. The truth is simpler and more selfish. I want to learn from her. My daughter has developed an architectural language that speaks to the future in ways mine cannot. If I'm lucky enough to collaborate with her, it will be as equals. I set my phone down, unexpectedly moved. My father had never been one for public vulnerability or admission of error. Yet here he was, telling the world he had something to learn from me. I pulled out the leather portfolio he'd left with me, tracing my fingers over the sketches inside. His precise, confident lines intersected with tentative curves and arcs, his attempt to incorporate my aesthetic into his. It wasn't skillfully done. He was clearly outside his comfort zone. There was something touchingly genuine about these awkward attempts at fusion. Underneath the preliminary gateway sketches, I found something unexpected: older drawings. Projects from decades ago, early in his career when he'd been more experimental himself. Buildings with flowing lines and unconventional forms, not unlike my own work. Projects that had never been built, dreams that had been set aside for the more commercial neoclassical approach that made him famous. The revelation hit me like a wave. My father hadn't always been the architectural traditionalist I'd rebelled against. He'd once been innovative too, before market pressures and client expectations had channeled him towards safer, more profitable designs. This wasn't just about him recognizing my talent. It was about reconnecting with a part of himself he'd abandoned long ago. I called Thomas. I found something in my dad's portfolio, I said when he answered. Early work. Completely different from anything he's known for. How different? Like he could have been JK. Stone 40 years ago, I explained what I'd discovered. I think this collaboration might mean more to him than just capitalizing on my success. So you're considering it? I gazed out at the gateway site, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell. I think I am, but on my terms, which are equal partnership, full creative input, and my name, my real name, prominently displayed alongside his. He'll agree, Thomas said confidently. You know why? Why? Because you've got what he doesn't have anymore, the courage to break the rules. And I think he misses that. After we hung up, I sent a text to my father. Meet me at Gateway tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring coffee. His reply came immediately. I'll be there. That night, I spread all my current work across my apartment floor, the riverside plans, early concepts for a sustainable housing development, and sketches for a community arts center. I hadn't shown these to anyone but Thomas. Tomorrow, I would share them with my father, not seeking his approval, but offering a genuine exchange of ideas. As I gathered everything into my own portfolio, my phone chimed with a notification. Architectural Digest had published a profile of me online, titled, Out of the Shadows, J.K. Stone Revealed. The article was respectful, focusing more on my design philosophy than family drama. The final paragraph read, in an industry where legacy often defines trajectory, Jade Williams chose to create her own path, not by rejecting architectural tradition, but by reinterpreting it for a new generation. Her revelation as J.K. Stone represents more than a plot twist in Miami's design scene. It signals a powerful merger of classical training and boundary-pushing innovation. Williams hasn't just emerged from her father's shadow, she's created her own light. I closed my laptop, feeling a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter. Not just in my career, but in my relationship with my father. Whether we collaborated or not, we would finally see each other clearly. The next morning dawned bright and clear, typical Miami perfection. I arrived at Gateway early, watching the sunrise paint the warehouses in golden light. My father's car pulled up precisely at 7, and he emerged with 2 coffee cups in hand. "Good morning," he said, offering me one. "Black, 2 sugars, still your preference?" I nodded, surprised he remembered. "Thanks." We walked in silence for a few minutes, sipping our coffee and surveying the site. "I found your early work," I said finally. "The experimental designs from the 70s. He paused mid-step. Those were from a different time. "They're brilliant," I said honestly. "Why did you abandon that direction?" He smiled wryly. "The usual reasons. Client demands. Financial pressures. A family to support." He glanced at me. "Your mother was pregnant with you when I got the Harborfront Commission, my first major project. They wanted columns and symmetry, not flowing forms and experimental materials. Success has its own gravity. So you compromised." I adapted, he corrected. "And I don't regret the buildings I've created. But seeing your work, what you've accomplished as Stone, reminded me of possibilities I'd set aside." The honesty in his voice moved me. For the first time, I was seeing my father not as an architectural titan or demanding parent, but as another designer who had faced his own struggles and made his own choices, some creative, some practical. "I've brought something to show you," I said, opening my portfolio and spreading my current projects on a flat section of wall. "These are what I'm working on now, what J.K. Stone would have revealed next." He studied them intently, asking thoughtful questions about structural choices and material selections. There was no condescension in his manner, only genuine professional interest. When he suggested modifications, they were offered as possibilities, not directives. "This housing concept is particularly strong," he said, pointing to my most experimental design. "The community integration is something I've never considered in quite this way." "That's what I want to bring to Gateway," I said. "Not just sustainable materials or innovative forms, but a new relationship between buildings and the people who use them." He nodded, then reached for his own portfolio. "I've been thinking about our potential collaboration. If we're going to do this, I want to be clear about roles and recognition." Here it comes, I thought. The conditions, the control. Instead, he handed me a document, a formal partnership agreement for a new firm, Williams and Stone Architects. "Equal partners," he said, meeting my gaze. "Your vision and mine, with neither subordinate to the other." I've already filed the paperwork, though obviously we don't have to use it if you decide against collaboration. I stared at the document, stunned by the gesture. "You're that confident I'll say yes?" "No," he replied. "I'm that committed to doing this right if you do." The sun had fully risen now, bathing the Gateway site in clear morning light. I could almost see it, the building we might create together, neither purely his vision nor mine, but something new born from both. "Williams and Stone," I said, testing the sound of it. "It has a certain ring." He smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one he used for clients and cameras. "Does that mean you're considering it?" "I'm doing more than considering it," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm in." 6 months later, I stood with my father on the Gateway construction site, hard hats on, reviewing progress on what the architectural press had already dubbed Miami's most anticipated new development. Our design, a revolutionary blend of classical proportions and cutting-edge sustainable elements, had won unanimous approval from the selection committee. "The Eastern Pavilion framework is taking shape nicely," my father observed, pointing to where workers were assembling the innovative curved supports I'd designed. And the plaza foundation is exactly as you envisioned, I added. The proportions really do work perfectly with the waterfront. We developed an unexpected rhythm over the months, our different perspectives creating productive tension rather than conflict. I'd learned to appreciate the timeless elegance of my father's approach, while he'd embraced my more experimental ideas with growing enthusiasm. Thomas approached, tablet in hand. We've got the updated renderings for the community space. The three of us huddled over the screen, debating sightlines and circulation paths with the easy familiarity of a well-established team. As we talked, I noticed a familiar figure approaching, Sophia Martinez, recording device in hand. The dynamic duo, she called out, "Mind if I get a few quotes for my feature?" My father glanced at me, deferring in a way that still felt new and surprising. I nodded my agreement. "What would you like to know?" I asked. "Let's start with the big question," Sophia said. "Jade, after years of working under a pseudonym to escape your father's shadow, why agree to this collaboration?" I looked at the emerging structure before us, neither purely his vision nor mine, but something new and powerful born from both. "Because true independence isn't about rejection," I said. "It's about choice." I chose to incorporate the best of what my father taught me while staying true to my own vision. The result is stronger than either of us could have created alone. As the interview continued, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The painful years of hiding my work, the dramatic revelation, the difficult conversations that followed all had been necessary steps toward this unexpected harmony. The building rising before us would stand as evidence that legacy wasn't something simply passed down, but something continuously reimagined. I was still the architect of my own destiny, but now I understood that destiny could include my father without being defined by him. And that made all the difference. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to forge your own path while living in a successful parent's shadow? What's more important to you? Breaking completely away from family expectations, or finding a way to honor your roots while still being true to yourself?